What's up, everybody? New video here. I'm tired, people, man. I'm tired of all this bullshit. Tired of it all. So we're gonna just rant. It's just tired of people. Israel is an apartheid state. It should not exist. Aren't all countries apartheid states, and that's why they're fucking countries? Like, isn't that what makes a country a country? It being like a supremacy? Like, yeah, we're gonna band together because we believe our morals are superior than anybody. That's what forms a country. All countries are apartheid countries. Like, technically, right? I don't know. But, like, still, though, you know, like, the Palestinians calling themselves, the fact that they want to call themselves the Palestinians, like, tells you, like, what they want to do. The fact they can call themselves Palestinians tells you what they want to do. And it's really not that fucking hard to see, like, what's going on over there. Okay? Like, here, let's go. Let's take a journey. Let's take a little journey into Austin's world. Here we go, everybody. Journey into Austin's world. Here we go. Here's the Middle East. Okay? This is the Middle East. Here we are. Look at how big it is. Look at how big the Middle East is. Massive. Middle East is huge. Israel is right here. They're surrounded by a bunch of Arabs. You got like 60 billion freaking Arabs and then like 100,000 Jews. Somehow they're still around. People don't realize that. Most people don't realize that, I don't think. There's like 6 billion Arabs and like 100,000 Jews. You wonder why that is, okay? Like, yeah, obviously, like, Jews were the first freaking Philistines. Like, that's why they're there. It's because they're technically the first ones. You call them Philistines, Palestinians. It's their army. They had to form an army after they came out of fucking slavery. Okay, they were both slaves. Both of them were fucking slaves to the Egyptians. The Arabs and the Jews were both slaves to the Egyptians. It was just the Arabs were the ones who kind of were allowed to control the system for them. It's kind of how it was. Like, Arabs were the slaves of the Egyptians. That's what Mesopotamia really was. It was like the slaves of the Egyptians, but like having their own world as well. The slaves enslaved themselves. The slaves kept other slaves enslaved. That's how they enslaved their frickin' slaves, is so that they had like a hierarchy system and that the slaves underneath would be kept below the slave. That's what the fucking pyramid is in the fucking beginning. That's why there's steps. That's why there's fucking steps on the pyramid, is because each step is a different rank in their system, in their hierarchy of slaves. And it was the fucking slaves at the fucking top that kept all the slaves at the fucking bottom under fucking control. It's kind of fucking common sense. You have Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt is above ground and Lower Egypt is below ground. They kept their slaves below ground. That's why they have lighter skin. That's why the Arabs have like light skin. Jews have lighter skin. And then the kings and the queens in Egypt, they were black. That's what Israel is. Israel is really like the first fucking Palestine. And when they were both slaves now, that's where the iconoclasts come from. That's where the iconoclasts come from. Is those were the slaves that when they started coming out from underneath the ground. That's where the iconoclasts come from. So they were the slaves that like started coming out from underneath the ground when the revolt happened, like back in the Old Testament days. All right. So you had these slaves coming up out of the ground, all right, like they had to like form an army to prevent themselves from ever being slaves again. And that's really what Judaism kind of is. Okay, like Jews, they were the last ones. That's where the Jewish religion comes from, is they were like the last ones to come out from underneath the ground. Okay, now the thing with the Jewish religion though is like they're old as the earth, probably. Like they really are. Is they're like the first slaves. Like that's really like what they are. Like that's how they had so much power in the world, is because like they were the slaves from like the old dynasties. Like and so that's where some of their religion comes from too. Like all the hieroglyphics in Egypt, like those are the different like ranks of slaves that they had. Like the interpretations were like different ranks and whatnot. Anyways. And so, like you had the slave revolt. That was the problem. The Egyptians gave their slaves way too much power. See, what I'm saying makes sense, all right? Like, the Egyptians, they gave their slaves too much power. That's why there was a slave revolt. That's kind of where the Jewish religion comes from. So like, the way I'm using logic, like I can say like Druids were the first slaves, which is like kind of where the word Jew comes from. Druid, slave, or Druid, Jew, Druid. All right. Like there's a white guy in the Middle East. All right. What was his name? It was the Mesopotamian guy. I forget, like Enki and Enlil. Go look up Enki and Enlil. It's like a bearded white guy who was a god in the Middle East. That was a Druid. Okay. Those Sumerian gods were actually Druids that were in the Middle East. That was just how they remembered them in the Middle East. That was just the preferred place to be. The Druids, they were worshipped as gods. And then you had like the slaves in Egypt. Okay, so the Druids, they controlled the female priest class. Okay, and that was kind of like that was the human trafficking market of the world. Like before there was like fiat currency, all right, the currency was the female priest class. That used to be the currency on the planet, and it was controlled by the Druids, who were, out of Stonehenge, and they were technically like the first Jews. But then you had like the slaves in Egypt, and like they were the ones kind of running the show, because like they were the slaves of the Egyptians, and like the Egypt was the capital. All right. Like Egypt was like the capital of the world back in the day. And it was the kings and the queens that ruled it. And they had their own slaves. And like, it was like, obviously the kings and queens didn't do fucking shit. They just sat on their ass. They didn't do anything. That was all set up for them over there. All right. That's another story. But they had their slaves do everything for them. All right. And they gave their slaves way too much power. And that was why the slave revolt like kind of happens, because they gave they worshiped their slaves kind of. Like they wanted to make their slaves like them. And they like kind of like worshiped them for it. And this is like they gave their slaves too much power. But like they were the slaves. At the end of the day, like they were still slaves and they were treated like that. But like, so their slaves would become priests. Like that was like their priest class was like run by their slaves. And that's why I say like they gave their slaves too much power. It's because the Egyptians priest class like was run by, like that was their slaves. Like their priest class was their slave class. Basically. Like there was a difference, but like the highest slaves, like after you were, you ascended the ranks of being a slave, like then you would be made a priest basically. And they were the ones kind of like running the show. And you could call them the first Jews, all right? Just because of like the way that they controlled things and how some of their like mysticism is like interwoven into like Kabbalah and like Jewish mysticism and stuff like that. And so there was a slave revolt. Moses led the slave revolt. They gave their slaves too much power. That's why there was a slave. It's part of the reason why there was a slave revolt. But it was like the same thing going on back then that it is today. It wasn't just one thing going on in the world. It was like a whole bunch of different things going on at once, which was like their end times. It's why we don't live in castles anymore. It was like their end times back then. So there's a slave revolt. The slaves came out from underneath the ground, and the last ones that came out is where modern Judaism comes from. And it was the way that like people had to like adopt certain things in order to like prevent themselves from being written over. That's why Jews get table scraps. Like, if you notice, but like Jews basically get like table scraps from the world, you know, but like there's such a small group of people that like table scraps to them is like, you see what they do with it, you know? And that's why they get table scraps, though, again, because they were the last group that came out from underneath the ground. How do I know we were underground? As the ocular anatomy. Okay, first, like our photoreceptors face the opposite direction. Second off, we've got more rods and cones in our eyes. Rods perceive black and white, cones perceive color. Okay, like why do we have twice as many receptors for shades from black to white than color when there's more variation of color in the world than there is shades of black to white? Okay, go look this up. Like, we're nocturnal creatures. Humans are nocturnal creatures. Ocular anatomy is evidence we were made to live underground. Go fucking look this up. It's a fucking fact. It's not fucking rocket science. It's fucking Google. Fucking Wikipedia. Fuck. Anyways. So humans are nocturnal creatures. We were made to live underground. White people, that's why white people have white skin. It's because like we were the original like slaves. That's why Jews are white. It's because like they were like the original slave class. But they just, like I said, the way that they got table scraps, you know, is like where their religion comes from. It's like table scraps from like the Middle Ages, which is like, you know, Harry Potter days. Okay, like imagine like, you know, here we are into the future and like, you know, someone finds freaking like Voldemort's wand or something, you know, like there's no other wands. It's like the Elder Wand is gone and like Harry Potter's not around and like some random dude, homeless dude finds Voldemort's wand somewhere and like becomes the most powerful person in the world. Okay, that's why they're excavating stuff like underneath the Vatican. Like that's why they're like in the Bible, they will run to the mountains. It's because like that's where Voldemort's wand is from the Middle Ages. There's shit buried in these fucking mountains. And that's why they have people in freaking Colorado. There's Colorado, look at Colorado. It's a giant fucking pile of dirt in the middle of the United States. It's fucking awkward. It's weird. It's fucking weird. Why is there a giant pile of fucking dirt in the middle of the United States? Where did it come from? There's no tectonic plates in the middle of the United States. Like, there's tectonic plates in the side and the coast, like California, okay, like the Kashmir mountain range or whatever is it called? Like, you know, there's a mountain range over there, you know. Okay, fine. Like, yeah, the tectonic plates moved. But like, where did fucking Pikes Peak come from? Why is there a giant pile of fucking dirt in the middle of the fucking continental United States? Where did it come from? Who put it there? Who the fuck I tell you who put it there. It's the same fucking people who put those fucking dinosaur bones where the fuck they are. The same people who put the Pikes Peak, the fucking giant pile of dirt that people call fucking Colorado. Okay, like that's the mountain in the Bible that it talks about people run into because there's technology buried in there. There's fucking technology buried in there. Because that's what was going on back during the slave revolt. Like that's why they came over here, because all that stuff was going on over there. They stretch it out. They make it seem like it happened over the course of like thousands of years, but it was really like instant. It's part of the Big Bang. All right, it was more like really instantaneous. That's why shit is the way it is. Anyways, moving on. Slave revolt, Jews, Palestine. That's why they're called the Palestinians, though, is because the Palestinians they're like an army. That was the army that formed, that had like after you were done being a slave, you needed to form an army to prevent yourself from like ever being enslaved again. And that's what the Jews did. They Philistine themselves, I guess. And so like these Arabs, like they saw them doing this and like they knew that if they didn't do the same thing as well, that their ways of life would come to an end. And so this is how ancient tribes had to deal with each other. They would adopt practices from each other to outlast each other. And that's kind of what's screwing them up over there is like You know, like the Arabs have to adopt some of the practices of the Jews, or else like the Jews are going to wipe them out. It's just how tribes outlast each other. They adopt other practices, you know, from other tribes. And this is how tribes outlast each other. And so they just, yeah, like I said, they adopt practices from the other and they do it better. That's what China's trying to do, like with everything in the world right now. It's like obvious. Anyways, so you know, the Arabs, they adopted the practices of Jews because they came out of exile. Then you have like, I mean, it's some of it's the way that they are with their women too. Like they're both very communal with their women. Their women, both of their women wear freaking burqas, you know, like they do. And again, going back to female priest class days, that's why those women dress the way that they do, because that's what the female priest class started doing differently back in the day when pain during child labor came about. Female priest class couldn't really function anymore when that happened. Where did pain during child labor come from? It came from gravity, the way gravity changed on the planet. When those things up there left, when those things up there dropped ship, gravity instantaneously got stronger. And that's where the last ice age came from. The atmospheric barriers of the planet dropped, instantly let in the cold air from outer space. That's where you get the frozen North Pole and South Pole from. And that drop of atmospheric pressure is what opened up the ozone, allowing the cold air from outer space to flood the planet. That's why this North and South Pole snow guy, they're going to melt. Like, they're going to melt again. Yeah, it's going to happen again. Maybe it won't. I mean, God's in control ultimately, so God can do whatever it wants. But anyways, so the Jews came out of exile. The Jews came out of exile, came out of slavery, and they had to form an army. And that's pretty much where Judaism comes from. Like that's pretty much where, because again, like I said, like they're given table scraps, and they're older than just when they came out from exile. Because like I said, they had a religion while they were slaves, okay? And that was the religion that ultimately controlled the world. Okay, so Jews had a religion like when they were slaves that's like probably like slightly different than like some of the Orthodox stuff today. All right. Having to do with like the hieroglyphics and stuff. So so the Jews, they had a religion when they were slaves. So they weren't called Jews, but like some of the religion, some of the practices in their religion today ties back to their, to those days. Because they even before then, like there was like, they still had like a different religion controlling the world. Like before, even before the days of Egypt, guess what? It was another religion controlling the world. And it was the same people that was controlling that religion that turned into the Jews today. And, it's been the same group of people controlling the world, but it's the priest class. It's the priest class that controls the world. And it's the way that those things up there are involved in how ruling classes control this planet. That's where ruling classes come from, really, is what those things up there are doing to this planet, and the influence and control, the subtle control that those things have. Because remember, just because something's subtle doesn't mean it's not powerful. And it's the way those things up there give rise to the ruling class on the planet. And that's where all of the technology comes from. And that's how those things up there disseminate technology to us through a ruling class. Okay. And that's a whole like part of the algorithm that gets like left out with some of their war going on over there. It's just like you wonder like whose world this really is. Okay. Like meanwhile, like those things up there are running around. Like, yeah, okay. You wonder whose world this really is. Like, we're not on top of the food chain, okay? Like, I don't know if you haven't noticed, but we're not on top of the food chain in this level of existence. So, Jews were, it's hard to say that Jews were the first Philistines just because, like, their ancestors are also like the Arabs. Like, they're like brother and sister, and they were both slaves to the Egyptians. So, like, neither of them was like Philistines first, because, like, technically they were both like slaves to the Egyptians. It was just the Jews were like the ones like on the lowest of the totem pole. And like, like I said, they're the last ones that came out of exile. And they knew that if they didn't freaking, socialize the way that they did, they would get put back into exile. That's what they had to do for themselves to prevent being put as slaves again. Because like I said, it was their slaves that enslaved their slaves. And so like the Arabs were the slaves that enslaved the Jews. So like the Jews used to be the Arab slaves, like back in the Middle Ages. And, but they were still both the Egyptians' slaves. So they were all underground. So like Mesopotamia, like the same group of people, like that's underground in Mesopotamia, like it's the same underground cavern complex connected to Egypt. Like it's a massive underground network over there. So, it's really just one location. You have all these different groups of people, these different races of people. You have Africans, you have Arabs, you have Jews living in one location that they like call like the Middle East, like Egypt, Sinai, Iran, Iraq. All right. Like these are like maybe Turkey. These are all like in the Middle East, and you have like very different amounts of ethnic people in these regions, okay? And they look different too. Like black people look different from Arabs, and Arabs look different from Jews. Like a lot of Jews today are lighter skinned, but like OG Jews, like real Jews, like they're like more dark skinned actually. Like OG, like real Jews, like people who are like, there's so many different, you have like Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardic Jews, there's so many, like that's the thing about Judaism and like why they're a race. But they were, like I said, like it's where Jews come from. Is like they were the last ones that came out from underneath the ground in like hundreds of years ago when humans finally started coming out from underneath the ground, because those things up there left the surface of the planet. Those things up there used to live on the surface of the planet with humans. And when they left, that's when humans started coming out from underneath the ground. And now they can't come back. They want to come back, but they can't. They need chaos. They need as much chaos on the planet as possible so that when they return, people immediately just start killing each other. All right. So that's where Jews come from. They come from the same place we all come from, God, but underground. And like, but the thing is like when they came out from underground, they were like really the first ones to like militarize. And then it was the Arabs that like started to militarize after them, because like they saw them do it first. Like technically like the Jews were like the first ones to like militarize themselves in the Middle East. Arabs, they needed to do it too, because again, like they were just another group of slaves, but there's a lot more of them. There's like there's a lot more of them. That's why the Jews are the last ones to come out. All right. So that's why there's not as many not as many Jews as there are Arabs, because there's so many more. Like, people just started like flooding out from underneath the ground, you know, because everybody knew what was going on. Like, everybody knew what was going on in the world. This was back when the collective consciousness was still doing stuff to itself, which it still is, but there's more of a breakaway happening now. There's more breakaways going on, which is like what I'm doing here now. I'm breaking away from the system. You can tell I'm breaking away from the system because of the way I'm freaking speaking. My hair. Maybe it's my hair too. Free freaking Palestine. You know, but the thing is, like, you just look over. There's the fact that there's like 100 million Arabs and like only like a few hundred Jews, like, should tell you, like, that says something. Like, that says something. Like, that says something. There's, and yeah, that says something. The fact that there's so many Arabs and there's nowhere near as many as Jews. But it was the Jews that militarized first. It was the Jews that militarized first. You know, it's like, imagine like being in America and like black slavery. Like, that's kind of what was going on and like with like black slavery in America. Okay, like in the South, like free black slaves, like they had their own cities and like they were left alone. It was the racist Northerners that was burning all their shit to the ground. Free black slaves would move into their, like, they had the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Rosewood, Florida, Englewood, Florida, Black Wall Street. There were over 20 cities in the South that were all set up, run by black people, okay? And they were left alone. Like, yeah, I'm sure there's problems. Okay, John Horse was an asshole. Yeah, John Horse was he was a ninja. You could call him a freaking a ninja-er. He was a ninja-er. Go look up John Horse. He was a ninja-er from the freaking 1800s. That dude was a real ninja-er, like a real cowboy ninja-er. Dude caused a lot of problems. He was a straight up ninja-er. Like the definition of a fucking old world ninja-er. That's why all the fucking Seminoles are in Oklahoma. But they're from Florida. You ever wonder why all the Seminoles are in fucking Oklahoma, but they're from fucking Florida? Because of a ninja. Because of a fucking ninja. That's why like half the Seminoles were like black. Like all these like free slaves like became Seminoles and then John Horse. Anyway, I'm going way off topic. But the thing is, okay, well no I'm not actually. No I'm not. The thing is because you have shit like that would happen, alright? That's what would that's what would have happened. You would have had shit like John Horse happen, yo. If the Arabs didn't freaking, I guess you could say the Arabs had a military first because like they were keeping the Jews like as slaves. But it was because of the stuff that was going on in Egypt that like overthrew everything. You would have stuff like that. So like the way John Horse like overthrew, like used the Seminole Indians to like, he overthrew some Confederate army. Like there is a massive battle that John Horse, that was a big defeat. The fact that John Horse defeated like the Confederates in the battles that he did, like, that's what would have, like, that's what would have happened to, I mean, it's a different situation over there, but like, you know, like, that's why it was a civil war though in America, okay? Is because you had all of these like independent Southern entities. Okay, and like it was a race war. Like there was absolutely a race war. In the beginning, in the beginning of the war in the South, and like this is related because like here's the thing, if the Jews didn't militarize, like, after they came out from being slaves, same thing with freaking, like, the Civil War. Like, that's what the slaves in America were allowed to do. And, like, that's why it was called a Civil War. It's like, they were allowed to militarize, like, after becoming slaves. Like, they had their own cities and stuff. But they weren't really, like, planning revenge. Like, slavery was, like, normal back then. So, like, yeah, there were problems, absolutely. But, like, they were busy, like, they had their own cities. Like, they were busy doing shit with peanuts. Like, George Washington Carver found over 300 uses for the fucking peanut. That's what fucking black people used to be busy doing, like, after they were fucking done being slaves. Okay? Then again, like, they had the reason why they were able to do that because those men have slaves. But, like, again, slavery in the back days was different. Like, whatever. Like, but the thing is when the black people came out of being slaves, okay, they socialized differently. They created cities for themselves. They didn't create a military, but, like, they had shit and they could do shit though. So I guess they did. It was more like a militia, which would be the same thing, you know. But people had cities, like, in the South. Like, people, like, they did fight with each other. It basically did turn into that, though. So, like, you know, it turned into a civil war. But it was, honestly, it goes to the North. You know, it was because of the Northerners. You know, it was because that's what united the South, ultimately. Was because, like, they were like, if we don't do something, if we don't unite, the North is going to wipe us all out. And that's really what united the South. Because, like, in the beginning of the Civil, you had states like fucking, what is it called? Fucking Louisiana, Missouri. I think in the beginning of the Civil War, Missouri was, like, such a southern state, it fought against the rest of the South. And you had, like, a couple other states that were like that. You had, like, I think, like, Texas and maybe another state, like, fought against the other South. And, like, you had, like, other states. And, like, that's why it was a civil war. You had, like, the North fighting against, like, the South. And then you had, like, the South fighting against itself and the North. The South had a lot of power. Okay? This is where, like, steampunk genre comes from. And so South eventually said, like, if we don't unite, the North is going to tear us all apart. And that's kind of where the Confederacy comes from, is because that was, like, how they united against the North towards, like, the end of it all. And so, like, the same thing in the Middle East. If you compare, like, the stuff going on in the Middle East today with the Civil War, okay, let's compare the Middle Ages to the Civil War, because there's a lot of comparisons there. You know, like, free slaves who stayed in the South, okay, versus free slaves who moved to the North. Okay, free slaves who moved to the North. Yeah, okay, so that's what free slaves moved to the North, and you had slaves in the South. It was just a different situation because of the way religion didn't really control the Civil War the way religion controls the war in the Middle East, though. Okay, so you have to kind of take that into account. You know, like, the war in the Middle East is a war more about religion, while, like, the Civil War was more a war about a way of life, people protecting a way of life. It was not about slavery. It was more about how, it's like Epstein stuff. It was about how the people who have power saw us as having too much power. So they took away the public auctions of slaves. That's really what the the Civil War was more about. It was more about the removal of public auctions of slaves, because that's a practice that they still do today. And like they kind of just reserve that back for themselves. That's more what the Civil War was about than anything. And Abe Lincoln was just like a front man for all that. Abe Lincoln was an asshole, okay? Like, don't even get me started on him. That's why they put him on the penny. Anyways, so war in the Middle East is about religion. The Civil War is similar because it's a way of life. The Civil War is more about a way of life. Freedom, more, like I said, like George Washington Carver found over 300 uses for the frickin' peanut. Black people had their own cities. They could live in their own cities. It was the racist Northerners that burnt all that shit to the ground. It wasn't other Southerners. Other Southerners were not burning other black people's townships down. That was the racist North. That's what racist Northerners were doing. Okay, so you see, like, but in the Middle East, the Jews, when they came out of exile, like, they militarized, and that's when they started, like, claiming an area as their own. And they knew in order to do that, they had to militarize to do it. And so you had these other outer groups, like, witnessing this, and, like, they tried to keep up with it, which is where you get all these, like, factions, these, like, different Arab factions. And that's how the Jews started fucking with their shit, is because the Jews were just trying to create a place for their own, and how that disrupted all the other shit going on over there. And that's why it's still okay for them to be there today, because it goes back to back then, and that's what caused all this stuff, because it's still over there. All the different factions are still over there today. Like, that's where all those different factions come from, is that's what Jews did when they first came out of exile and had to kind of, militarize to fortify themselves so that they wouldn't get taken over again. Again, going back to look at frickin' Lawrence of Arabia, all right? Go study history. Go study Lawrence of Arabia. It was a white man. Gee, you ever read the Bible? You ever read the Bible? You ever see Jesus Christ? You ever see a picture of Jesus Christ? What color are his eyes? He's got blue eyes, in case you ever noticed. Go to the Middle East. There's an evil eye everywhere. Jesus was a white man. Look at Lawrence of Arabia. Go look at Enki, Enlil, the Sumerian gods, bearded white men in the Middle East. Okay, who is Lawrence of Arabia? He was a British spy that united all these tribes in the Middle East that fought against each other. All these Arab tribes, they'd kill each other. And Lawrence of Arabia was a white man. He was a British spy. He went in, united all these tribes, got them to fight with each other. And it was because, like, it was World War II. I don't know. He wanted to take Aqaba, which is like a city in World War One. It was World War One. Excuse me. World War One. World War One. World War One. And so they wanted to take Aqaba, which is a city in Jordan. And he united all of these Arab tribes to help the British take Aqaba. And once they did, he left. He dropped ship. And then what happened? All these Arab tribes that he united, they started fighting each other again. It was like they went right back to just killing each other right after Lawrence of Arabia. So if you study the history of the presence of white men in the Middle East, you're going to see a pattern. You're gonna see a pattern here. Okay. I know God doesn't like what's going on here. Okay. You're gonna see a pattern here of the presence of white people in the Middle East and the effect that the white man has had on the Middle East. Okay. Go look at Jesus. Go look at Lawrence of Arabia. Go look at the Sumerian gods. Okay, go study all of that stuff and then get back to me and then maybe we'll have a conversation, because right now I'm talking to a fucking phone. Goodbye.